Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2025 McGuire Family Prize for Societal Impact Lecture. I'm Nina Pauchnik, Interim Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, and I'm happy to see so many of you gathered here today. And special welcome to those members of the Family Fellows Group who are joining us on campus for the whole weekend. I also want to welcome the McGuire family. Their generosity helps us honor members of our community, and I'm happy to be here introducing this lecture named in their honor. The McGuire Prize recognizes the type of contribution that we support and develop at Dartmouth and within the School of Arts and Sciences. Dartmouth community members who have contributed or are responsible to making a significant positive impact on humanity, society, or the environment. I have the pleasure of introducing Soroush Vosoughi, an associate professor of computer science here at Dartmouth. He builds AI models to better understand intelligence and create safer technology, developing systems that incorporate human-like cognitive structures in reasoning rather than relying only on massive data sets and superficial pattern matching. His Minds, Machines, and Society Lab emphasizes trustworthy AI and work on methods to measure and mitigate harmful behaviors. Think bias, think toxicity, think hallucinations, or misalignment. He opens up the black box of AI to understand why models behave the way they do and build grounded, agentic models that use tools and simulations to make decisions more reliable. Professor Vosoughi has a list of impressive awards ranging from Google Research Scholar Award to NSF and NIH funding to numerous Best Paper Awards. Rather than reading all those out, I'd like to highlight why he is such an excellent choice to moderate this program. He is the epitome of our teacher-scholar model here at Dartmouth, having impact on the world not only through his groundbreaking research endeavors, but also through his dedication to engaging students with his work in the classroom and in his research lab. This is how we train future leaders, and some of them will become future McGuire Prize recipients. Professor Vosoughi considers deeply the intersection of computer science and societal impact, something that both the McGuire Prize recognizes and that its recipient today demonstrates in his own scholarly pursuits. Please join me in welcoming Professor Soroush Vosoughi to Dartmouth.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It is my great pleasure, welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce the 2025 McGuire Prize for Societal Impact recipient, Hany Farid. Thank you. For more than 2 decades, as a member of Dartmouth faculty, Hany helped pioneer the field of digital forensics, transforming how we understand trust and authenticity in the digital age. His innovations have had extraordinary global impact. Photo DNA, now deployed worldwide, has enabled the identification and removal of child exploitation imagery at unprecedented scale, supporting law enforcement agencies, human rights organizations, and technology companies, including Microsoft and Google, in protecting vulnerable communities online. More recently, his groundbreaking work in deepfake detection has become central to efforts to combat misinformation and safeguard democratic discourse. In 2024, Hany co-founded Get Real Security, a company dedicated to authenticating digital media across images, video, and audio, work that has only grown more urgent as generative AI has reshaped how information is created and consumed. Today, as questions of truth, trust, and technology sit at the center of public life, few voices are more essential or more thoughtful than Hany's. Please join me in welcoming Hany Farid. Thank you. Thank you.
First of all, it's great to be home. It's just a lovely being here. And to the McGuire family, thank you, not just for honoring me, but also just for creating the award for societal impact. I mean, what better way to reward people who try to affect positive change in the world. And what I want to do today is talk about the last 20 years of my life when I was here at Dartmouth and how I got on this journey and sort of where we've been and where we're going. Sion, don't worry, the one in prison is not real, I think. As you heard, I've been thinking about digital authentication and online safety for the last 25 years of my of career, and all of that has really started here and has been bootstrapped here, and I'll tell some stories of how that happened. It all started when I was a postdoc. This is how long ago it was. I was at the library getting a book, which now seems weird. And I was in the, checking it out, and in the return cart there was a book there, and the line wasn't moving, and I didn't have a cell phone. And so I picked up the book in idle curiosity, and I literally opened it to a random page. And that page was introducing photographs into evidence in a court of law. And I like to tell students this is in the 1900s, when we still lived in an analog world. It was 97, in fairness. And we didn't know what was coming. We didn't know what was coming with the internet. We didn't know what was coming with the digital revolution and the internet revolution, and certainly the AI revolution. But we knew something was brewing in the digital revolution. And I started thinking, well, what happens in the federal rules of evidence when you have digital media, not analog media? Because the rules were clearly out of date and were not ready for a digital world. And so this is 97, 98. I'm finishing up my postdoc. I come up to Dartmouth in 99. And I can't shake this idea. It's just, I keep thinking about it. I don't know how to solve it. I keep shaking it. My good friend, Tillman Guerin-Gross, who's a professor over in the engineering school here, and I used to play tennis. And I don't think he's here, so I get to say I was a much better tennis player than him, and he can't contradict me. And one day I wanted to schedule a time to meet with him, and so I took a picture of Agassi here, and I took a picture of Tillman's face, and I spliced it into that photo, and I sent it to him. And as I did that, I realized that I had introduced an artifact in the image. And by the way, for the students in the crowd, this is how science works. It doesn't work by just sitting down and solving problems. It sits down by screwing around and being like, oh, that's interesting. And the artifact was really interesting. So if you notice on the previous slide, I had to stretch Tillman's head a little bit to get it to fit onto Agassi's body. So what does that mean to stretch digitally? It means you're introducing pixels. So for example, on the top there, you've got a bunch of little pixels in a little 3x3 grid. Those numbers are the pixel values. And if I want to stretch it, let's say by a factor of 2, I've got to fill in the missing pixels. And I have to do that digitally with an algorithm. In fact, it's a deterministic algorithm called interpolation. And then when I did that, I thought, oh, I should be able to detect that. Because those red pixels there will have a very specific correlation to their neighboring pixels that the other ones that are naturally recorded won't. And in fact, that was the start of our ideas. I went over to the office right next to mine. Aline Popescu, who was a grad student. I said, hey, you want to do something really crazy? And he said, yes, fortunately, and we started working on this. And then that led us to the next technique. This was, and I had to say, a lot of our ideas are ripped from headlines. It's just stuff that happens in the world. We look at it and we're like, huh, how do we fix that problem? When John Kerry was running for president in the early noughts, somebody started circulating. This is maybe one of the earliest examples of political disinformation in the modern internet age. This photo of him sharing a stage with Jane Fonda, who was then a controversial, well, still is, was a controversial figure because of her positions in the Vietnam War. And it's not a very good fake. She's got like a floor stand sitting at a table. This is pre-AI, really early Photoshop. But this thing circulated, and it had a huge impact in the way people thought about a presidential candidate. And when we saw this photo, it was really grainy, really low quality. We knew we couldn't do any of the resampling techniques because it was a statistical technique that wouldn't survive those types of alterations. Let me go back one slide again. But when you take a photo with two people and you composite them together, most likely they were photographed in different environments. So here, for example, if you take a photo of me, I've been illuminated by the lights that you see around you. If you take a photo of somebody outside, you've got a single directional light source, the sun. And so we started asking, well, can we tell the difference between the illumination patterns that strike a person and then find inconsistencies? Because if somebody's standing next to me, we are being illuminated by the same environment. And so the way we did that is we wrote down some equations. We can describe, with some assumptions, what is the brightness of a point on a head based on the direction to the light source. And I won't go through the equation here, but know that you can write down equations that explain physical phenomena in the world, and then we can ask, are the lighting parameters that you can estimate from a person consistent across a scene? Now, one of the things that makes this hard is that in order to estimate lighting, I have to know what the 3D structure is of the object. Because if my face is round, then light will hit it in a different way than if it's flat or a different shape. And so what we started doing, and again, this is pre-AI and pre a lot of the tools, was being able to fit 3D models to people's faces, estimate the 3D geometry, which today is a trivial task, but back then was actually quite hard. And then from that, we could estimate lighting, and then from lighting, we can find differences across individuals. And this is one of my favorite examples of using it. This is when Kim Jong-un was still leading North Korea. He hadn't been seen in public for months, and there was speculation that he had died. And that was concerning to a lot of folks in national security, a lot of questions coming out in the press, and we kept getting questions because North Korea was known to circulate false information. And this photo was released by the North Korean press agency showing Kim Jong-un surrounded by his generals, and our intelligence agencies and our press outlets were convinced that it was fake. And I won't get into why there was, but there was good reason to think that it was fake. And so what we did is we went in and we started building 3D models for all the people there and estimating the lighting. And in fact, superimposed on the bottom here are little spheres with the estimated lighting direction from each of the individuals perfectly consistent. And at that time, pre-AI, this would have been very difficult to do, and we had done another set of forensic analysis. And it was one of the first examples where we really started to see the impact of the work in the world outside of us, outside the academic circles. We were getting questions from intelligence agencies, from press outlets, from law enforcement. What are we looking at? How do we respond to this? If he's dead, it's a very different question than if he's alive. And between 97 and 05, as we started doing that in the early days of my career here when I was an assistant professor, we started developing a suite of these techniques. I've described 2 of them to you. And it was a pretty bespoke space of where we had impact. It was basically evidence in courts of law, how I started thinking about this in the first place, and media outlets / intelligence agency 1 or twice a year. But it was manageable, because it was still early days of the digital revolution, early days of the internet revolution, early days of the Photoshop revolution, and AI was still a glimmer in our eyes and nothing more. And so we were feeling pretty good about ourselves. We had sort of created this field. We started publishing some papers. We started being able to help some folks reason about a complex world. Chapter 2, things started getting a little bit more complicated. The digital revolution is full on now. The internet revolution is here. The social media revolution is here. AI is still a little bit ahead of us. And so we kept going. So now we started thinking about this question more holistically, not in these one-offs, right? This resampling, the lighting. So we started thinking about the entire imaging pipeline. Think about the physical world. How does light interact with physical surfaces? What happens when that light strikes the lens and travels through the optical train? What happens when that light then hits an electronic sensor and goes from analog to digital, and then goes through a series of post-processing steps and get compressed, and then shows up in Photoshop and eventually on the internet? And we injected ourselves in each stage of this imaging pipeline, built physical mathematical models to model the physical world, the optical train, the electronic sensor, the post-processing, and then looked for anomalies that would suggest that something wasn't natural. And so let me give you a few more examples of this. So one of my favorite ones in the 3D world was once we started getting traction in the space, I get a lot of emails still from people on the internet, which is not a good thing. And one that was persistent was this image of Lee Harvey Oswald, who of course was the accused assassin of John F. Kennedy. And this was the famous backyard photo showing him holding the Communist manifestos. He's got a sidearm on his right hip, and he's holding that same rifle that was found at the site of the assassination. And people were convinced that the photo was fake. It had been created by the FBI or pick your favorite conspiracy boogeyman, and that I should analyze the photo and blow the lid off of this conspiracy. Got a lot of those emails. And one summer, I got a particularly coherent one. And people raised some really interesting questions about the photo that I didn't actually have answers to. And I thought, well, this would be interesting. Let's go analyze this photo. And so what we did is we built, as you can see in the middle panel here, full-blown 3D reconstruction of the backyard photo. So we built, and actually Lori Loeb and her team helped me build this model, I remember really well, in the pre-Dolly lab, yeah? And so we built a 3D model. We knew his weight, we knew his size, we knew the weight of the gun. We could start reconstructing, and then we figured out where is the sun, because you can see his cast shadow going back to his right, and we built a full-blown digital 3D reconstruction, which was really hard at the time, because now you can push a button and do this with AI instantaneously, and you couldn't do it back then. And then once we did that, we can explain everything in the photo. The shadows, his height, his pose, he was balanced, he was not going to tip over. And it was remarkable how we can explain everything and explain away all of the stories about why people thought it was fake. And I thought this was really cool. I thought, this is gonna be amazing. I'm gonna put this to rest. So we published our paper, and things did not go as I would have expected. Predates Jan. There was a write-in campaign to have my tenure revoked because I was part of the conspiracy to kill Kennedy. Now, I will point out, I wasn't born yet when this happened. It doesn't matter. My favorite explanation as to how I did this before I was born is I was accused of being a time traveler, which was awesome, by the way. I thought that was really cool. But it goes to show you that you can do great science and you can explain things, but there are some people that you just can't bring around. And if you want to believe I'm a time traveler, there's not a lot I can do to help you. And I'm going to come back to this theme in a little bit. But it allowed us to start building techniques to reason about the physical 3D world and ask, are these things physically plausible? And then we started thinking about the optical train. I love lenses. They're incredibly beautiful. You have 2 of them on your face, by the way, and they are miraculous results of millions of years of evolution that bend in focused light so we can see clearly. But they bend light in a very specific way. Yeah. So for example, light bends proportional to the wavelength. So the red part of the visible spectrum, the green part of the visible spectrum, and the blue bend different amounts. And when you take a photo, what that means is that there's a misalignment in the photo between red, green, and blue channels. And it is not the fault of the lens. In fact, this is why you see rainbows. That's exactly why we see rainbows, because of that split. And so we could model those optical distortions, and then, for example, if you splice something into a photo that came from a different part of an original photo, what are called the optical aberrations would be inconsistent. And that was simply a failure of physics, and we could point those things out and find splicing in images. And then we started thinking about geometry. I love geometry. It's incredibly beautiful and incredibly powerful. Here's one of my favorite examples of it. I'm showing you 3 wooden boxes, and in front of them, there is a mirror. And of course, those boxes are being reflected in the mirror. Now imagine standing on top of that mirror looking down. That's the bottom panel there. You've got the 3 boxes on the left, the mirror on the right. And of course, you see objects reflected in equal distance on the other side of the mirror. It's basic physics of how mirrors work. Yeah. And from that top view, the lines that connect points on the object to the reflections are all parallel to each other because light travels in a straight line. Now, when I image it from this angle here, those lines, of course, are not parallel. They converge. They converge to a single point with a very specific geometry. Yeah? And by the way, artists in the room will maybe be thinking about vanishing points. Hold that thought for a second. And so, for example, this was actually inspired by a case where somebody had created a fake photo and they had added a reflection into the mirror, but they put it in the wrong place because they didn't know this geometry. And so, for example, here, this is a consistent reflection, and that's an inconsistent reflection. You can see how subtle it can be. And you can detect those inconsistencies. Reflections are incredibly hard to know where they go. And so we started to be able to reason in the image about things like reflections. And since I mentioned vanishing points, the same geometry holds for vanishing points. The ground here are square tiles. Those square tiles in the physical world are parallel to each other, but when you image them under linear perspective, they converge to a vanishing point. That's an incredibly beautiful geometry, and I'm going to come back to that for analysis. I'm going to show you in a couple of slides. Okay, so that was the next 5 years. 2000 to 2005 to, I guess, 10 years to 2015. Things started getting more interesting. We were still dealing with evidence in courts of law. We were still testifying in courts. We were still dealing with media outlets. National security started to become more of an issue. We were getting more and more calls from the CIA and the NSA and the FBI dealing with now a digital world that is fast moving and fully interconnected. And the early days of disinformation. Nothing like what we see today, but you started seeing it because the internet was on the rise, social media was on the rise, and suddenly we were dealing with this not once a month or once a week, but almost every day. And things started to get a little chaotic by 2015. We still, I felt like, had a control over it. I felt like we got a handle on this. It's adversarial. We develop techniques. The bad guy does their thing. But the cadence felt okay. Photoshop would release a new version every 12 to 18 months, but we had a handle on it. But around 2015, we started hearing murmurings, the early days of AI, the early days of deep fakes. It was just starting to bubble up. And we started seeing things that were a little troubling. Yeah? And that's going to lead us into the next chapter. So chapter 3, 2015 to 2020, things started getting a little weird. Not as weird as they are now, but they started getting a little weird. And because of AI. And now we're not dealing with Photoshop and sophisticated state-sponsored actors. We're dealing with anybody who has an internet connection and a laptop who can now create fakes. And now we've got to start thinking about a whole new type of threat vector. It's not just images, first of all. It's video and audio, a whole new thing we didn't have to worry about. And the ease with which you can make these things has just absolutely gotten obliterated, and anybody can now create fakes. So this is one of my favorite early deep fakes. It was created in 2016 by the great Jordan Peele. I'm going to play the video, and then I'm going to tell you what you're looking at.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you. And stay woke, bitches.
All right. I apologize for the bad language, but I think it makes the point, right? You can get President Obama to say anything you want. And this is 2016. This is 10 years ago Jordan Peele made this with a pretty nascent technology. And it was stunning. And it really woke a lot of us up. And we started thinking, oh, man, we're in a lot of trouble. And we didn't know where we were going to land today, but we knew something was coming. So we started thinking about how are we going to start detecting these things. And the first thing we did is we wanted to focus on world leaders, because at the time it was difficult to make deepfakes of anybody. It was really people like Obama and the Scarlett Johansson of the world that were vulnerable to attack. And so we started thinking about how do we defend against this? How do we defend against somebody posting a video of President Obama or President Trump or any world leader saying and doing anything that leads to a geopolitical crisis? I think we can all agree that's a pretty serious consequence. So I'm going to play you a series of short clips. See if you notice anything, and I'm going to talk around this little clip here.
Hi, everybody. 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 Hi, everybody.
All right, those were all different. They were the openings of his weekly message that he would give when he was in office. And did you notice that every time he said, hi, everybody, he nodded his head backwards a little bit? Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Just like a little thing he does, a little tick mannerism he does. We all have it. We all do it, the way we talk with our hands, the way I pace when I walk, for example. We all have very specific ways we talk. And for people like Obama, I can learn those things because I can just download hours and hours and hours of video of him talking. And so what we started doing was building what we call persons of interest model. We would take hours of somebody talking, and we would learn what are the mannerisms, what is the relationship between his facial expressions and his body movement and his head movement. And it goes something like this. So on the top is an authentic frame from Obama, and on the right there, I'm showing you a graph that correlates his head rotating up and down around this axis here, and smiling and frowning. And so when Obama smiles, he tends to lift his head up. They're correlated. And when he frowns, he tends to turn his head down. It's the thing he does, right? And you can see that in the correlation. The blue and the orange are correlated. Those two movements, head movements and frowning and smiling, are correlated, Right? Now, when I create the type of lip sync deepfake that you just saw Jordan Peele do, how was that made? It was the mouth was synthesized to be consistent with what Jordan Peele was saying, but the head was doing what the head was doing in the original video, which means the head and the mouth don't know about each other. And now you can see a decorrelation between those two signals. They're not lined up. And so we build these very specific models for President Zelensky, for President Trump, for President Biden. And then when we get videos released, we can go in and look, is this the person talking? And on top of that, we do things like face biometrics and voice biometrics and other things to identify identities. So that was one technique in the early days that we developed. And then things started getting really complicated because we started to have to do this at scale. Most of what we had done up until this point was bespoke. I would get calls every day from media outlets, from law enforcement, national security, from lawyers, whoever it is, and be like, what can you do? And we'd sit down, my students and I, and we'd try to figure out what was going on. But then we had to start dealing at scale. Yeah? And so a couple years back, I partnered with LinkedIn because they had a massive fraud problem. LinkedIn is a 1.2 billion users. I won't tell you how many, but a large number of those are fraudulent and were being used for nefarious purposes. Everything from crypto scams to spam to phishing, to disinformation campaigns. And we partnered with LinkedIn, and it was the first time, and I wasn't confident we could do this, is we developed and deployed a technology that worked at the scale of 1.3 billion users. 500,000 new accounts being created every day. Every single one of them was being scanned by technology that we developed and deployed to determine if the person in the photo was real or not. And it was really the first big success to work at scale. Because when you work at scale, 90% accuracy doesn't work. 99% accuracy doesn't work. If you're at 99% accuracy, you're wrong 1 out of 100 times. With 100,000, 500,000 uploads every day, that's a disaster. You've got to be operating at 99.999, and any engineer in the world knows that that is very, very hard to do. Okay, now, at this point, things are getting pretty weird. We are now inundated. We are dealing with the same stuff. Evidence, media outlets, national security, disinformation. Now scams and frauds are on the rise. Individuals, organizations. We are seeing democracy being threatened by fake content. We're seeing horrific increases in child sexual abuse, non-consensual imagery, general lack of trust. Nobody trusts anything anymore, which led to a different problem, which is it wasn't just that fakes were causing harm, it's that when the real stuff would get out there, people would say it's not true. And now, where are we? All right, the real stuff is fake, the fake stuff is real. How do we reason about a very fast and complex world? All right, last chapter, because I think I'm at the 5-minute mark. As you heard in 2002 or so, I co-founded Get Real Security, and because we were just overwhelmed. We couldn't keep up. We were just getting buried in requests. We were getting buried in the speed with which things were happening, and my tiny little lab just couldn't keep up. We decided to start a company. It was incubated by Ballistic Ventures. I'm out in San Mateo. We've been up and running for 3 years. Our headcount is 52 or so now. And it was really motivated by what we were seeing in the world around us. We were seeing attacks on democracy, on society, on organizations, and on individuals. A couple of notable events. At the early days of the Ukraine invasion, there was a story about the mayor of Kyiv, the mayors of Berlin, Vienna, and Madrid were on a call with who they thought was the mayor of Kyiv, and in fact, it was the Russians trying to extract information about the conflict. And it was a real-time call, and it was a deep fake. That's insane. And that is not the first time it happened. It has happened to members who are currently sitting in the White House and members of the Senate Foreign Relations, where they have been on calls, secure calls, with who they thought was somebody, and in fact, it was somebody else. This isn't fun and games anymore. This isn't the type of deep fakes of sharks swimming down the street. A couple years back, there was a fake image of the Pentagon being bombed. It went viral just as the stock market was opening. And in 90 seconds, the stock market dropped $500 billion. $500 billion in 90 seconds. Think about the impact, the global economic impact you can have with a couple of well-placed fake content. This isn't fun and games anymore. So I'll give you an example of this, just one example to show you some of the forensic techniques. We get these questions every day. This morning I was dealing with some footage coming out of Ukraine that was questioned as it was authentic or not. This was a video purportedly showing an Iranian site being bombed by the Israeli. It created a lot of uncertainty because it was a nuclear facility. I'm just showing you 4 frames of this. And then here, this is our interface that we've created. It's a little hard to see, but the red lines along the desk there are all parallel in the world, and they should converge, as we saw with vanishing points, to a single point. And on the right here, you can see they do not. Strong evidence that something is manipulated. So this is the type of analysis we now do on a daily basis for all major news outlets around the world and some of our national security colleagues. Okay, let me wrap that up and just say, while I'm the one on stage here, I think you all know that there's an army of people who work for us and with us over the years. These are just some of the students that have worked with me. And what I really love about this slide, and you should have known this was coming, not a single one of these people is real. This is the people. You can't trust anybody, not even me. So here at Dartmouth, it was Shruti, Valentina, Olivia, Kimo, Eric, Sophie and Aline in the early days, and at Berkeley it's Sarah and Maddie and Justin have been working with me. Phenomenal students who've done just incredible work over the last decades. I also, if I can just take one more minute and say, yes, the students do a lot of work, but the thing you have to understand is, at an institution like this, not any institution of higher education, there is an army of people working behind the scenes. The staff who every day are working incredibly hard to enable faculty and students to do what they do. And they do it quietly, and they do it well, and they do it, frankly, without a lot of recognition. The chairs who run the departments. When I was here, it was Scott Drysdale and Tom Corman who ran the department and allowed me to do the things that I did. The associate deans, Rob and Mary Lou, Elizabeth, the deans of faculty, Mike Gazaniga, Mike Massanduno, amazing. The climate that they created that allowed us to do the things we did, allowed us to be adventurous and creative and take risks and do things. And I told somebody the other day, and I stand by this, I would not have been able to do what I did at any other institution. There was something really, truly unique about this institution in terms of the space it gave us and the diversity of thought here that you are interacting with on a daily basis. Okay, I'm gonna stop. Thank you very much, everybody. I think we're going to take some questions, or are you going to? Okay, all right. I assume these are for us.
Thank you so much, Hany.
Thanks, sir.
So we're going to start with a few questions that were pre-submitted by the audience, and then we'll open it up to everyone. So let's start with this one. Is there anything new about this moment? You've been studying manipulated media since the early days of Photoshop.
Yeah.
Does anything feel genuinely different about generative AI? Yeah. And are there any main misunderstandings about these technologies that you may want to correct for people here?
Yeah, good. So is mis and disinformation, and you know this as well as anybody else, new? No. We have had mis and disinformation since the printing press. It's not new. But there are a few things that are new, which is the barrier to entry has changed. So we went from an analog world where people like Stalin could manipulate photos in the darkroom by painting over negatives, to the digital age where somebody who was skilled enough with Photoshop to do it, to now with generative AI, anybody with a keyboard and an internet connection can make an image or a video or an audio of anybody doing anything, anywhere. So the barrier to entry for creation has gone to zero. So anybody can enter. That's both exciting and terrifying, number one. Number two is when Stalin manipulated photographs, he could change the history books. Now, what can you do when you create fake content? You can carpet bomb the internet with it in seconds. Millions of views. By the time I get an email from a BBC or a CNN, usually there's 1 million or more views. And that happens in seconds, minutes. So the distribution is radically different today than it was when I started in this space. And then the third thing is the amplification, the algorithmic, you know this better than anybody, the algorithmic amplification. Not only are the social media sites hosting this material, they are actively amplifying because it drives engagement. And of course, we have never been more divided as a nation and as a world. And so there's an eager audience that is re-amplifying. And I think that collection of 4 things is really distinct. And I think that's why the threat vector has changed radically in the last 20 years.
And how about misunderstandings about generative AI?
Yeah, I'll give you one that has made me a little crazy the last few months. People think generative AI is magic. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. There was the kidnapping of Guthrie last week or so, and there was a video released by the FBI of what seemed to be the kidnappers with a full-blown ski mask in the Ring camera. Somebody took that image, gave it to Grok AI, and said, tell me what this person looks like without a mask. That is just, yeah, that's probably one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. I had to think about that for a second. And they posted that photo, and you can say, okay, well, that's sort of dumb. But here's the problem. Somebody also did that with the ICE agent who shot, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting, Renee Good. He was masked. Somebody took that image, gave it to Grok AI, and said, tell me what he looks like, because people wanted to identify the ICE agent. And they ended up leading to a misidentification of a publisher of the Minnesota Star who started getting death threats and got doxxed, because it led to a misidentification. Generative AI is not magic. You can't see behind walls. You can't unmask people. But because they're so confident in their wrong answers, and this is true of text also, people think they're magic, and it is now leading to a whole new level of harm. It's not, I don't think people are intending to be malicious. I think they're just naive about how the technology works.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? We're going to have mic, I believe, runners, right? Please raise your hand if you have any questions. Go ahead.
Don't call on Roger. No, come on. Sorry.
Please wait for a microphone. Please use a microphone if possible. Yes, thank you.
Why has the field allowed these powerful tools to be in the hands of schmoes like me?
Well, that's a fair question, isn't it? Okay, so I think this might be a rhetorical question, Roger. There's a lot of money to be made. And what we know about the technology industry is while they have produced phenomenal innovations that have changed our worlds in many, many positive ways, I think they have been cavalier with the safety issues. I think they've been cavalier in protecting kids online, marginalized groups online, societies and democracies. And I don't think it has to be that way. I reject this notion that we either have innovation or safety. And I know that I'm right because in the physical world, we sort of have both, right? We innovate in medicine, we innovate in travel, we innovate in electronics, but stuff doesn't blow up in my pockets because there are consequences when you get it wrong. Look, in the early days of Silicon Valley, I think it was reasonable to say, hey, look, let's let this thing go. We don't know what the internet is. Let's not get in the way. It was a reasonable thing. But here we are 20 years later, and there's a lot of great things that have happened out of Silicon Valley, but there's real measurable harms to individuals, organizations, societies, and democracies. And we don't have a habit of holding big tech accountable for the harms yet. I think that is starting to change on a regulatory side and on a liability side. But I think it's the move fast and break things. I think we're going to beta test on the public. And it's very much ingrained in the way I think computer scientists think, honestly, is just get it out there, let's see what happens, and then we'll put the guardrails in later. But I don't think that works anymore. And I think we have to be a little bit more thoughtful about how we develop and deploy technologies.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead. Please wait for the microphone.
Hi, my name is Abu Bakr. I'm a postdoc at Dartmouth. Thank you so much for this insightful presentation and very eloquent. I have a personal question. Do you use your tech on your phone when you're reading news all the time? How do you assess, knowing that this is the level at which disinformation or deepfake happens?
It's a really great question. First of all, I don't read the news anymore. It's just too depressing. Well, you know, one of the drawbacks of doing what I do is I just don't trust anything. And I'll tell this great story. I've told Sian this story. When she emailed me about this prize, I deleted it because I thought it was spam. I'm like laying in bed. I'm like, I wonder what that was. I mean, this is the reality. I do, by the way, I do. It's not on my phone. It's on my computer because that's just the way the tech works. I don't trust anything anymore. I mean, I do trust certain outlets. I've worked with almost every major news outlet. I think there are ones that are very, very good. Post the layoffs at the Post, they've had a phenomenal investigative journalism section. BBC is incredible. Reuters has a good group. Agence France is amazing. The Times is consistently good. I think there are certain outlets that are very, very good. And I get this question all the time, so let me just say it now. People say, well, how do I protect myself against it? And my answer is stop, for the love of God, reading social media. I mean, this is easy. Social media is not a place to get reliable news and information. It's fine for what it does, but it is not a place to get reliable information. We have to go back to what Jordan Peele/Obama said, trusted sources, right? But I will tell you, every image I see, even in the Post and the Times, I'm like, drawing lines for shadows in my head, trying to figure out what I'm looking at, Yeah.
Let's go through this. Go ahead. Yeah.
So I was interested that the progression of your focus on the optical side of things, visual. And I'm curious, as people get more skeptical of visual, are people shifting towards audio and less around visual? And how can some of the technologies that you've developed, I mean, I saw how you did the correlation between audio and visual, but focusing on audio or other aspects.
Yeah, it's a great question. So here's been the progression, and it followed how easy it was to manipulate the media. So photos were the first to drop. At some point, I think people became skeptical of photos because they become relatively easy to Photoshop and to AI generate. But there was this moment where we could create really good images, but not so much the voices in the video. And so voices in video held a different stature. That is over. I will tell you, in my lab, we run perceptual studies. This is in collaboration with my wonderful wife, Emily Cooper, who's also an academic. And we show people images. We have people listen to audio recordings. We have people listen to video. It's over. As of this year, the average person is slightly better than chance looking at videos, audio, or images in a controlled lab setting where you set you up for success, not doom scrolling on social media where you're being, you're not particularly ready to do these things. So I think audio and video is still more trusted, but I think that's just a matter of time. I think people are starting to realize now, not so much the video. And I will mention, by the way, that we've been talking a lot about the online world, but this is true in real time. I can, on my laptop, open up a Zoom, a Teams, or a WebEx call, and I can change my identity and be anybody I want. And you are seeing this happening. I can tell you there's not a single Fortune 500 company that has not been infiltrated by North Koreans, imposters, people stealing intellectual property, people stealing passwords, people breaking into accounts, because you can't even trust real time anymore on videos. This is what's left, by the way. Sitting in a room with somebody, this is the only thing I trust anymore. Because it is just, this is how easy everything has gotten. And the technology is not hard to use anymore.
Let's see. Let's go to the other side. Thank you.
Knowing what you know, how do you think what you know should be integrated into undergraduate education and maybe even to high school education? And where precisely, like in social studies, or how would you do that?
Good. I love this question because here we are at Dartmouth and we should be thinking about these things. I think a lot about education, obviously, and I do think that this college is too late. I think it has to actually go much earlier, probably even primary school, not even high school. I think we have to teach critical reasoning. We have to teach digital literacy. We have to teach people how not to be necessarily skeptical, but how to be critical, how to think about what you're being told and not just to respond emotionally to these things. There's some really good work being done in France, I think Portugal, where this has been brought in at the earliest stages of the education. And that's where I would bring it in. I think college is too late. You've got to bring this in for the early days. There's some good news here, by the way, is, I think there was a whole generation that came up and we weren't ready for this. And we sort of broke that generation. I think the generation coming up now that's just starting college now is a little bit better prepared. I think they're more skeptical. I think they're more critical. They're also walking around with Polaroid cameras, which makes me really, really happy. And they're not walking around with smartphones. It's amazing. I saw a kid the other day on campus doing this with a Polaroid, and it made me so happy. So I do think part of this will self-correct, but I do think we have to be intentional. I think here at the college level, I've been saying this for as long as I've been here and since I left, is this has never been a better time for the liberal arts education. While a lot of what we do is technical, it spans everything. I talk a lot to lawmakers and to regulators and to NGOs. You've got to be able to think broadly about policy, about economics, about society, about technology. And there's never been a more important time for liberal arts. Certainly, I tell people more and more than ever, this is the time. And I would say, if I can say one more thing, is I think part of the reason we got ourselves in trouble with Silicon Valley not being thoughtful about the implications of their technologies to society is because we trained really, really, really good scientists, computer scientists, and engineers, but not so much broad thinkers. And I think it was easy to just stick your head in the sand and being like, I'm going to build this thing because it's cool, and not think about the consequences. So I think this is the time to educate the next generation of technology leaders to be more thoughtful.
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. The storyline presented the fix after the fraud.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there are use cases where the fix prevented the fraud.
Good.
And if it's an area of research that's getting sufficient attention.
Yeah, I was hoping you wouldn't notice, but you did. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, we're a postmortem, right? We come in after the mess and we fix it. But here's some good news. We are starting to get out ahead of it. Australia, for example. By the way, Australia banned social media for people under the age of 16. Phenomenal. I would have liked to have been 30, but fine, I'll take 16. Really strict laws on non-consensual intimate imagery and people doing harm to individuals using this technology, and that is getting out ahead of it. The EU AI safety bill, the UK online safety bill, all now have protections for individuals and organizations around this, trying to get out ahead of it. So on the regulatory side, at least outside the US, we're starting to see some movement among our allies, and I take great comfort in that. On the more proactive technology side, I've been part of an organization called the C2PA, Coalition for Content Provenance and Authentication. And the way this works is not to wait until something shows up on the internet and gets 1 million views and then I come in and clean up the mess. But it's to proactively, if you are an OpenAI, a Gemini, a Midjourney, any of your favorite AI generators, when you create a piece of content, image, audio, or video, you will embed metadata that tells me it's AI generated. You will embed an invisible watermark telling me that it's AI generated. And then downstream, I can automatically detect that without any fuss or muss. So Google right now, before they released Gemini, put an invisible watermark called SynthID into every single piece of content. So if you go to Google and try to create something that's going to create harm, we will detect it almost instantaneously. OpenAI is moving in that direction. TikTok is moving in that direction. So there's movement in that direction because we've created this open standard for how to do this. And then it's going to go eventually into the phones because you have to authenticate on both sides, right? The fake and the real. So right now, there's a handful of high-end cameras that do the same thing. There are negotiations with some of the mobile providers to do that so that when I pick up my phone and take a photo of a human rights violation, a politician saying or doing something, it will authenticate at the point of recording. And that is a phenomenal success because then downstream, hopefully I will eventually be out of work. And now that's still, but there's what, 12 billion devices in the world. This isn't going to happen overnight, but there is a standard and a movement moving in that direction. And I think we'll start to see it unfold in the coming years.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, go ahead.
Related to that, I think you said BBC emailed you about a photo. Is there a way to automate your algorithm and have it essentially proactively screen out stuff?
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned, so most of what we do is fully automatic. So you can drop a piece of content into a web portal and it runs a battery of tests, and I would say 90% of the time gives you an answer. 10% of the time or so it's inconclusive, and that's when I get the email. So most of the time we can do this at scale, and we're pretty good at it these days. But there are days where something's just messy, right? This video happened to just be very, very heavily compressed. It came from a drone. It was really unusual, and it was showing a military strike on a Ukrainian city. So I spent the better part of this morning working on that. So yes, some automation. There's still a human in the loop, and then we have a full-time open source investigator who digs in. She actually starts digging in. Where was this thing posted? She finds the Telegram channels. Is it Russian disinformation? There's still a need for humans in this loop. Good open source is phenomenal. She will dig up things that you can't even imagine. So there's still a human in the loop for the edge cases.
So we started a little late, so we have time for one more question from the audience, if there are any questions. Yes, go ahead.
You applied physics laws, geometry. Did you ever come to something which is actually new? So you didn't realize that there is some, physics or geometry or whatever existing law, or maybe did you arrive to something which will not be useful only for forensics, but for something else, for my biometrics or other? Yeah,
that's a great question. Here's one of my favorite ones. It's of mixed efficacy, but when it works, it's really beautiful. When we talk, our heart is pumping, and blood is coming into and out of our face, right? That's what the heart is doing. And there's actually a very subtle difference in your face color. It goes from red to green to red to green to red to green at your heart rate. It's really cool. And it's not actually physics, it's physiology, right? It's your pulse, you're alive. And when it's a fake person, if it's an AI agent, there's no pulse. right? You're flatlined. And it's very, very hard measurement to make, so it's very, very subtle. But we have this thing called motion magnification. If you know what the temporal frequency is, which you do for most normal adults, you can amplify that very particular temporal frequency, and you can see the change in color in the face from red to red to red to green to red to green, and then the agent is just absolutely flatlined. I thought that was really cool. So this is actually one of the things we're looking at is physiology, the way your pupils dilate, reflections in the eyes. Physiology is incredibly interesting, and videos with humans are really, really important. So we're doing a lot of stuff with early stuff now with physiology as well.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one question, like the last question.
Yeah.
A couple of audience, like pre-submitted audience questions kind of converge towards this one question. It's a fun one. Is there a sci-fi book you might have read which inspired your research direction? And what do you find most interesting in terms of the current state of AI and its relation to whatever you might have read as a teenager or older in sci-fi books?
Wow. First of all, I think this real world is weird enough. I don't read science fiction. I mean, I barely can deal with the real world. I don't read science fiction, but I will tell you something that did motivate me. It wasn't science fiction, but it was art. If you go, I don't know where we are, across the street to Baker Berry and go to the ground floor, there are these spectacular murals by Jose Clemente Orozco, painted in the 1930s. And when I first got here, there was construction on the other side of my office. I used to go down there and work. And I used to sit in front of this panel that showed a bunch of academics as skeletons wearing graduation garbs, giving birth to a little skeleton with books. Bob knows this one. And behind it, the town is burning. And you got to give Orozco credit for painting that at an academic institution. He was very critical of institutions. And one of the institutions he was critical of was higher education, saying that they had turned their back on society. And I'd seen this panel over and over again, and I never quite made much of it. And then I heard the tour guide explaining what it was. And I remember thinking, Jesus, it struck me. And I think it's particularly apropos to this day, thinking about social impact, is it really forced me to think about social impact. Like, what are we doing here? Are we just publishing papers and books that 5 people in the world are going to read? Or are we going to try to affect positive change? And it was really impactful. And I got to tell you, it's been 25 years. I still think about that panel. I went down there yesterday to see it, and it was exactly as I remembered it. I'd entirely gotten it. And it really, go see it, by the way. It's really, really beautiful. And it reminded me of how powerful art can be. Not sci-fi, but art. What was the thing about AI? I didn't get the last part of the question.
More about kind of, it's okay if, but basically, yes, most interesting or surprising.
Here's what surprises me, and I've had a few conversations with some of you over the last day or so, is if you had asked me 5 years ago or 10 years ago, can pure statistical inference lead to a ChatGPT or Gemini doing what it does, I would have said no. ChatGPT is statistical inference. It's a token tumbler. It's doing autocomplete. That's insane. How is that possible that it's this good? I think that's what surprises me, is that it turned out not to be that hard. It was just a boatload of data and then some clever algorithms at the other end led us to something that's pretty stunning. And I don't, when you think of sci-fi and the way they represent AI, it always seems like it's something much more dramatic. It turned out to be quite mundane. And that, I think, it surprised me.
Thank you. Okay. Very interesting. And I agree, by the way.
Yeah, okay.
So thank you so much, Hany.
Yeah, okay.
And let's go on.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you for being here. This was a wonderful conversation. And thank you all for attending and participating. Let's give our speaker one more round of applause.